We're joined by Harry Brown, lecturer in journalism in the Dublin Institute of Technology, Sebastian Hamilton, the editor-in-chief of the Irish Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, and Tanya Ward, the chief executive of the Children's Rights Alliance. And Tanya, the front page of the Sunday Times says laundry survivors snubbed the Taoiseach. The story's by Justine McCarthy, and it says that one of the three organisations that represented survivors at the Magdalen laundries inquiry has declined to meet the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach tomorrow. Are you surprised that they've declined?
No, I'm not surprised. I suppose, they would have probably expected a lot more from the current government, because certainly when they're in opposition, they got a lot of private support from Enda Kenny and Shatter. And when Shatter came in, the government only as far as 2011, before the UN Committee Against Torture, was saying that, the women were there in the Magdalen laundries voluntarily. So when Shatter came into government, they set up this review by McAleese to document particularly the role of the state's involvement in colluding and forcing these women and children into the Magdalen laundries. So when the report came out, you'd expect there would have been some form of an apology from government. And I suppose the suggestion from a lot of the papers, it's to do with liability, that if they do admit, and even one of the lawyers representing the Magdalen women has said that if they do admit liability, it will cost the state an awful lot of money. But I think in terms of moving forward, what they need to do is they need to meet with these women as soon as possible, and they need to look at a restorative justice scheme that compensates the women for being deprived of their liberty, that compensates them for the forced labour that they experienced, and compensates them from the harsh and difficult conditions that they were forced to work within.
In this instance, is the actual saying sorry the issue, or is the issue truly the exception of the accepting of liability?
I think there's a moral issue there, particularly for the women. They need to hear someone say sorry for what happened. What you find in the report, and this is where the report is very good in terms of the detail, it documents that 1 in 4 women were placed, and children were placed in those institutions by someone acting in an official capacity. Sometimes there's a legal basis for it. Sometimes the court sent them there because of overcrowding in jails. In other circumstances, it was a Gardaí picking up a homeless woman and bringing her to the Magdalen laundries as well. The fact that we have that in black and white in an official report is very important, and it means the government has to respond. The other thing that's kind of shocking from the report as well is the number of women who were placed there and children placed there by their families, and clerics as well.
Oh, I mean, let's not pretend that we as a society have suddenly found out that Magdalen laundries existed. The entire country knew they existed. I mean, a friend of mine, grew up down in Killarney, and he remembers going down with his mother to take the laundry from the hotel down to the Magdalen laundry, and as a society we were told that this was how it worked. And we went along with it. We believed, in a sense, what we were told by our political and religious leaders, that this was how it should be. So, again, I don't think anybody's saying the state is the only organisation to blame at all. That isn't true, but I do think
they had an obligation to.
But I do think there is a moral. Firstly, they were much more involved in the whole process than they've ever admitted. I mean, Bat O'Keefe said in the Dáil 4 years ago that the state had nothing to do with this, which turned out to be completely untrue.
Well, there's an interesting text in asking, has anyone sought comments from justice ministers from the 70s, 80s, and 90s on the Magdalen laundries?
Sure, but I mean, there's two questions. One is the kind of question of who was responsible. But now there's a question, okay, Enda Kenny is the Taoiseach now, okay, and it is his responsibility, morally, to say, I represent the state is sorry, the state begs your forgiveness for what was done. And let's not forget,
even if that carries with it, just to check, you're saying even if that carries with it,
there's a thousand survivors. There's 1,000 survivors, if we gave them 100 grand each, it would still be so much less than we're giving the bondholders this year anyway.
And to be honest, I mean, some of the groups representing women are not looking for a full redress scheme where lots of lawyers.
Right and wrong doesn't carry a price tag, Anton. It just doesn't. And this is, in my mind, this is why Fine Gael and Labour are tumbling in the polls, because that is shameful, and they know better. And if you watched Kathleen Lynch the other night on primetime, opposite Mary Merritt, who was telling the story of how she was put in an institution for stealing an apple, and Kathleen Lynch, who is a woman of principle, was squirming in her seat because she knew the position she was having to adopt, which is, we're not saying sorry to you, was shameful.
Yeah. I mean, Sebastian, as a newspaper editor, knows that the word sorry connotes liability. and there is and that clearly is what's going on here. But it's interesting. Your
just to put numbers on it, Harry. The last time that a Taoiseach, if I have this right, did it, it was €1 billion bill that flopped.
Right.
It was Bertie Ahern who did it, and €1 billion was what flopped.
No, I think as Sebastian has said, most people here wouldn't have a problem with €1 billion for this. But your texter asked about justice ministers from past decades. We know that the position of Irish officials up to a very few years ago was that these were essentially voluntary institutions. But certainly, I was funny enough, I was just showing a documentary from the 1970s to my class. It was a documentary about the inner city of Dublin, and it was Eamon McTamash doing the local history. But he mentions the Magdalen Laundry in Gloucester Street and describes it in very benign terms as an institution of mercy. And as on RTE in 1978, that was the official way of designating what these were. That people who needed this help were in these places and being looked after. And really and truly, there's to some extent, all of these institutions are complicit when here you had RTE at that time using that kind of language.
Well, to go to the point that Sebastian made about us knowing for a long time that the Magdalens existed, that this didn't come as a shock, what was going on in the laundries, this report didn't come as a shock, rather. If this week has passed, Tanya, when it would have been brought to a head other than being overtaken by other events, is the opportunity now gone for the women?
I don't think so. I mean, the reality is we have the truth, certainly in terms of the role that the state played in placing them in those institutions. I suppose the report isn't detailed in terms of the level of abuse that the women might have experienced. It suggests that it's really only that their liberty was deprived, that they were forced to work in harsh conditions. But
as if that were nothing.
Yeah, that was nothing. But they only spoke to 118 women, and 54 of those women are actually living in those institutions at the minute in the care of the sisters involved. So you were never going to get a full picture
and I mean,
of
what's interesting,
what actually was happening in institutions. But the other thing that comes up as well, and there's a good article by Dermot Ferreter in the Sunday Business Post, and he says, look, you can't actually make a judgment that these institutions didn't make money for the religious orders because they didn't have access to all the accounts. You don't have forensic accountants crawling all over the accounts to work out whether they made
particularly when you look at
this was a low-tech report. There's no doubt.
Well, if you look at the membership of the committee, they're virtually all civil servants currently working in government departments and a member of the Seanad. Frankly, Tanya should have been on that committee. There's no better qualified person to represent real human beings. Instead, you had a bunch of civil servants who are not naturally...
Well, except that the terms of reference were, as I understand it, very specifically to look at state involvement rather than to recount their stories.
That's what governments do, is they set terms of reference nice and narrow. But if you compare this, say, to the Ryan report, okay, different, but there was also a difference in the kind of thrust and the power. And this report, even within these terms of reference, was the kind of report the civil servants write. And, I think it would have been better if we had a lot more, lay people like Tanya who are qualified in representing, because a lot of these people that went in were children when they were taken
It's funny, the report describes the testimony of these women as stories again and again. I mean, it's just, there's not a sense of the seriousness of their experience.
Well, one of the things, it doesn't question their stories.
No, that's right.
that is positive.
Yeah.
When the women did get to the committee, they didn't question what they had to say. I think in terms of moving forward, I mean, we could set up an inquiry to see and get the fuller picture of what happened. I mean, where it differs from the Ryan report is, I'm from Cabra in Dublin. I can look at the school in Cabra that was covered by the Ryan report and I can see exactly what happened in that institution. We don't get that profile of institutions from this report. But it's very clear that even in accordance with the labour laws of the day, the women weren't being paid. They were deprived of their liberty. It's very easy to work out what they should have been paid if you were to...
Can I ask, Tanya, before the report came out, while the governments for a long time said that the state had no involvement, but there was an assumption that what the report would say would be a huge evidence of state involvement, and in actual fact it was probably, or was it, slightly less than we expected, because it said roughly 25%, which seems lower than we were geared up to expect.
Yeah, I suppose we did expect perhaps a higher number of women being placed there by the state. And that's what's extraordinary, is that we as a society, and I think we really need to ask ourselves about this, like some of the accounts that's included in the report is a sister brings her sister down to the Magdalen Laundry because she can't discipline her, and she's left there for a year until her brother comes down and collects her. Some women are placed there because of transgressions or perceived moral issues, they broke morals.
Placed there by their family.
Exactly, yeah. That's kind of extraordinary, and the state should have had a role in stopping families from actually doing that.
But also those figures were slightly skewed because the overall figure for references included people who have moved from one laundry to another, which, if you had excluded those, the proportion referred by the state would have been higher. But again, we're talking about proportion statistics. These were people, these were human beings, young women, many of them children. Mary Merritt stole an apple, and she gets put in this institution. And again, in all the talk of percentages, I think it's very easy to forget that we're talking, you could go out on Grafton Street this morning and see half a dozen young girls or women of an age that 30 years ago would be being forced into these institutions.
Yeah. Sebastian Hamilton, Editor-in-Chief of the Irish Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday. Harry Brown, Lecturer in Journalism from the Dublin Institute of Technology, and Tanya Ward, Chief Executive of the Children's Rights Alliance, will be staying with us through this break.
Savage Sunday
on Today FM.
Text to say, could the women of the Magdalen laundries send the report to the European Court of Human Rights? Tanya Ward, Chief Executive of the Children's Rights Alliance. Is there much in the way of European redress, do you think, for them?
Well, I mean, there's a choice to be made by the lawyers and representing the women, and it's either do you litigate through the courts, which can be very lengthy. A lot of the women involved are quite old, or do you look for a compensation scheme, a redress scheme that avoids going through the courts? And sometimes that's the best when you're dealing with the kind of numbers that you have at the moment. Sometimes that's the best form of redress, and that's what happened with the redress scheme that was set up in 2002. You either went through that scheme or you went through the courts. So I think in the first instance, looking at the compensation scheme that the state sets up, I think that's an important step. But I do think unless this issue is resolved, I mean, we've just had a children's referendum to rewrite what happened in Ireland, to put behind us what happened to children in the industrial schools. We can't put that in the past until we address and provide some sort of recourse for the Magdalen laundry survivors.
If you want to get in touch, 53102 is the number that you need. Our panelist, Tanya Ward, Chief Executive of the Children's Rights Alliance, Sebastian Hamilton, the Editor-in-Chief of the Irish Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, and Harry Brown, Lecturer in Journalism in the Dublin Institute of Technology. The front page of the Sunday World has a one-word headline, which is spoofer. And it says, former business clients tell how hostage riddle tycoon was a Walter Mitty character who duped them out of millions. This is Kevin McKeever, who the Sunday World says was McKeever and then became McGeever with a G, who was found wandering a road in Leitrim wearing only plastic and no shoes. And the story seems to be getting odder and odder, Sebastian.
It's just absolutely brilliant, this story, and it's one of those ones where, occasionally a story breaks where friends of mine would just start ringing him in the office and say, what is going on? And the truth is, we don't know. The guards haven't yet really got a satisfactory version of events out of Mr. McGeever.
The guards, though, are not the only police force interested in him.
No. Well, there's an Interpol red note from Dubai in relation to property fraud. There is we discovered very late on Friday night that a Kevin Michael McGeever was indicted by a grand jury in LA in 2003, and that investigation is still ongoing. So there's a lot of people interested in him, and an increasing belief that the Sunday World story is kind of exactly where this is going, that this man is not just a developer who happened to get on the wrong side of a few people. One of the things you'll notice that his brother is doing interviews on his behalf, and every time he gives an interview, it's a slightly different version of events. So it's a fantastic mystery. I can't wait, frankly, for the next instalment, but I do think, the Sunday World take on it is probably where it is.
Including some quotes, Harry, like a quote from a person who apparently was involved in business dealings with him that says, Kevin used to say he'd worked for the World Bank, and a lot of people now feel like complete idiots for believing him.
Yeah, there's one of his former colleagues, I guess you say, that yes, he got money out of me, but if he told you it was raining, you'd need to go out to the window to check. I mean, it's just the Sunday World has pushed this story a little further than any of the other papers today. I think it's fair to say words like fantasist and spoofer are in their Walter Mitty character, and also the suggestion that prior to vanishing, maybe other papers have had this story but haven't seen it, prior to vanishing, he sent 2 texts from a German and a UK phone to his partner apologizing that he had to leave. So there are a number of elements to this.
It has to be said, he also gives great picture, because last week he was standing in front of fancy helicopters. This week in the Sunday World, he's standing in front of a Hummer.
That's right, yeah, and apparently he loved going around in Hummers and Porsches, although they could have been leased. Yeah, is what someone is
to me, this is the next episode of Sherlock. You know, we'll get to the bottom of it, and it'll be amazing.
The other story that is in, I think it's in the Sunday Independent, it relates to Claire Daly and her arrest for drunk driving, which was, we have to make it very clear, made clear that she wasn't drunk driving, that she was significantly under the limit. But the story relates to her taking a Garda ombudsman complaint against the Gardaí who arrested her, and arrested her in a slightly, it seems, odd way.
That's it. I mean, it's highly irregular for the guards to handcuff women normally in arrests, and of course there is a lawful basis. The Gardaí do have a lot of scope to you know, in terms of the arrests that they perform, but it's highly irregular, and that's something that Richard Humphreys picks up, who's the legal advisor to the Labour Party in the Sunday Independent, and no doubt that'll be looked at by the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. And she was taken to a police cell and she was placed there. Now that particular part of it doesn't seem irregular. It often happens that they do place people in a police cell to make sure that they don't consume alcohol.
And the Gardaí have a total right to handcuff you if they wish to.
They have an absolute right to handcuff you if they feel that legitimate. I just think most people looking at this would say, you know, obviously Claire Daly, her big political friendship is with Mick Wallace, the tax cheat, and I think most people would prefer he was in handcuffs rather than Claire Daly, and that's the way it should have been.
They've got Garda sources here saying that they didn't know, that the arresting Gardaí didn't know she was a TD, which strikes us as a little bit unlikely. Justine McCarthy has a very good column about it in the Sunday Times today. She says the long arm of the law was never designed to gag the voice of democracy, and there is real questions, because obviously the background to this is that Claire Daly is involved in exposing what still remains to be seen, but maybe a pretty serious scandal involving the penalty.
And are we clear yet whether or not her complaint is about the manner of her arrest or about the fact that it became public so quickly? Because it only took 12 hours to get public.
Both those things, so far as I know. I mean, we were discussing this earlier, and as journalists, we don't want to be seen to be complaining about leaks from...
No, I mean, listen, as far as I'm concerned, you know, the more information we get from the guards about arrests, the better. So, you know, I don't have... Look, I'm sure Claire Daly...
Is there not an issue, though, of proper behaviour from the law enforcers that they shouldn't really... Not saying that they did.
Well, I think we should, move to an American system where, you know, it's just arrests and perp walks from the start, and then, you know... And I do think there is a big issue in this country across the board where people do not see that the forces of the law are applied heavily to a lot of people in powerful positions. So I would be for a situation where all arrests are made public and you know, perp walks all around, and they'll make for great pictures as well.
But I mean, from a treatment point of view, it's quite frightening to be arrested and handcuffed and brought to a cell, and subjecting someone to that for doing a left-hand turn when they shouldn't have. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, you know.
Well, for doing a left-hand, but she did, if the accounts are correct, say that she had consumed alcohol.
And also she was unable to perform for whatever reason a breath test, and
it didn't register.
That it didn't register.
Yeah, it didn't register. Yeah, and she was going to accompany them to the Garda station as well, and she didn't need to be handcuffed.
Yeah, she makes that clear that she was more than willing to cooperate and to go. The other story from within the papers, there is a look ahead to a documentary which is going to go tomorrow night, which is, I think, being presented by Richard Kern of the Sunday Business Post and Tom Lyons of the Sunday Independent, which looks at the fall of Irish nationwide. And if the quotes that they have in the paper from Michael Fingleton are repeated, it's probably worth watching for that alone. Harry, he has an interesting logic about why we're not getting back the £1,000,000.
Yeah, the million euro bonus, he says, he's not paying it back because he had a deal with the previous government that if he did pay it back, he'd be off the hook for everything else, that he'd essentially get, you know, what would you say, a permanent amnesty or something like that. But so he's holding on to his €1,000,000, he says, as a matter of principle.
And they have quotes from a letter written by Mike Ainsley, I was going to say the chief executive of IBRC. I don't know if he still is, given what happened this week, but at the time that he wrote the letter, he was, saying, regardless of whatever deal you had with Brian Lenihan, you got this after the state had to step in to stop your institution going bust.
And it's cost $5.4 billion. I mean, Irish Nationwide alone, $5.4 billion. Yeah.
He also
he's clearly a man of enormous principle.
He has outlined as well that he got rugby tickets for 10 years. Isn't that right? That was one of the things that was in it, and dental work paid for.
And they also and the bit that's jumped out at me was the Irish Nationwide paid for the wedding present, the $6,500 wedding present that he gave Jerry Gannon's daughter.
It's lovely, though.
So it's beautiful.
Really,
It's
really
What
lovely.
did you do with it?
A
It's an
George
antique
III
fruit
silver
bowl.
basket.
It's an antique fruit. It's where you put antique fruit. Come on.
It's great having your own private bank, you know.
Yeah, have your own private bank to buy wedding presents for. Bring it on.
Sebastian Hamilton, editor-in-chief of the Irish Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday. Harry Brown, lecturer in journalism in the Dublin Institute of Technology. And Tanya Ward, chief executive of the Children's Rights Alliance. Guys, thank you all very much for coming in. 53102 if you want to get in touch. Here's 3 Loud Night and Mama told me not to come.
Savage Sunday
on Today FM.